Cotton. Okame kick.
Heyo guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto the Melt. As a child, Naruto is taken in by Sarutobi to be his chosen successor to the mantle of Hokage. He develops a bloodline long thought lost to the world and learns along the way that, though he may be hated for his demon, his will of fire will burn brightly. And let's see what changes will come to the Naruto verse. Before we start, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to this channel for more what ifs, and check the description for the creator of this great fanfic. So let us start. Chapter 4. It was now into Naruto's 5th year and he had grown much. He was a bright and sunny child, always in the middle of things when he wasn't training with his senseis. Sarutobi had taught him henge and kawarimi and he was using them effectively to mimic passersby and swap with random items. Sarutobi insisted he be grounded in the basics before he was taught the more advanced things. And because he was starting so early, there was more than enough time. Guy had given up on the weights after a month. Sarutobi had been puzzled when the green-clad man presented him with Naruto's bodysuit and said it wasn't working. Hokage-sama, I can't train Naruto with weights anymore. They simply aren't helping. Sarutobi gave Guy a hard look and took a drag on his pipe. Explain. Guy nodded his head and sat the folded bodysuit on the desk. His body is adapting to the weights, Hokage-sama. His body is doing things that normal bodies just don't do, and the weights are not helping, they are hindering his progress. Sarutobi frowned and shook his head. I don't understand what you're telling me, Guy. Hokage-sama, as I'm sure you're aware, the human body's muscles break down and rebuild when they are stressed with weights and weight training. The same is said for gravity seals since stress is being put on the body. Yes, Naruto's body is not breaking down, Hokage-sama, it is adapting, adjusting to the weight. His muscles don't break down and reform, they merely adjust so the weight isn't a burden and he doesn't notice them anymore. His body moves as if they weren't there. Sarutobi drew on his pipe and closed his eyes. I suppose you've experimented with this. Of course, Hokage-sama. I raised the weights by 5 pounds each day and by noon. He had adjusted so that they didn't bother him. He never fatigued, he just adjusted. That's the best word I can come up with. He adapted. I'll allow you to take the weights away and we'll see what happens from there. These developments are somewhat troubling and yet, they are most fortuitous. My grandson will be a very powerful warrior when he grows up. Guy smiled and bowed. And I couldn't be prouder to know I have a hand in that. Currently Naruto was working on the Bunshin, but he just couldn't get it right. He had expressed his doubts to Sarutobi about his ability to perform the jutsu and had been told to keep it until he got it. But 5 months and no better results. That was pushing it. Naruto gritted his teeth and tried again. His control was what Sarutobi called adequate, and he knew he should be able to do it, but it was like he had a mental block. Most of his friends were practicing in the basics of their family's jutsus, but Naruto's family, having no specific jutsus or kekai genkai, was stuck working from the ground up. He liked henge and used it often. But his version was a little different. Naruto had finally gotten the henge down to a more than acceptable level and could change into anyone or anything he imagined. Sarutobi noticed that the boy was quite skilled with it and not only changed his shape but weight as well. In fact, he completely baffled his senseis. Sarutobi had called Guy in to be his witness to the wonder that Naruto had created and they both watched as he performed his henge into Guy. Guy nodded his head in approval. Same height, same build, same facial features. He was about to ask what the problem was when Sarutobi changed into Guy and beckoned him over. Tell me, Guy, what are the basics of henge taught in the academy? Well, the basics are that it allows you to transform into anything or anyone within reason. The body cannot be that much bigger than yours and the weight cannot be changed, but it is basically an illusion that is easily broken. Very good. Now, if one were to pump more chakra than necessary into the jutsu, what would happen? I don't know. Touch my shoulder. Guy touched Sarutobi's shoulder and saw the illusion waver slightly, as most illusions are wont to do when disturbed. Sarutobi released the technique and pointed at their young charge. Now touch Naruto's shoulder. Guy walked over and poked Naruto in the shoulder and his eyes widened when he realized that the illusion did not waver in the slightest. In fact, the illusion felt solid. That wasn't right. Henge was a low-level technique that required great mental effort to keep up constantly, and it wasn't a solid technique. True, the older you get the better with the technique, and there were even variations used that multiplied kunai and shuriken by hardening chakra to resemble the objects, but that's all they were, chakra. This shouldn't be possible on a child's level. Naruto whipped his head back and forth, trying to decipher what made the two so odd. Sarutobi merely smiled at the boy and patted him on the head. Don't worry about it. We'll tell you what I wanted to show Guy later. Of course, later, more often than not, never came, and Naruto was always left with questions. He rarely ever gets answers to any important ones, only receiving the vague answer, "We'll tell you when you're older." As he walked up and down the tree, leaves stuck to various points of his body, he thought about his friends. Ino still hadn't talked to him since that day, and the little blonde went out of her way to ignore him if possible. It hurt to lose a friend, but Naruto learned a valuable lesson out of that. When someone wants nothing to do with you, cherish what you have and move on. Hinata's baby sister, Hanabi, had been born, and their family was doing fine so far. Hinata's mother had contracted an illness though, and was constantly bedridden, leaving the little girl without her merry voice or kind words. She'd also been taken by Hiyashi to begin the learning points of Juken. The straightforward taijutsu style was an affront to Hinata's gentle nature, but she was trying her hardest not to disappoint. Kiba was spending more and more time becoming acquainted with Ninkins in hopes that he would receive his soon. His mother insisted he still had a few more years, but he held out hope. Shino had begun to cultivate his colony and communicate with them, and had become even more withdrawn. If Naruto wanted to see his silent friend, he had to make an effort to go to the Aburame district himself. And he didn't get to go often because he was busy himself. Shikamaru and Choji were both as lazy as ever, their fathers not seeing the need to begin training them yet, insisting that kids could be kids for a little while longer. He didn't know how Ino was doing, but he hoped she was doing all right. Naruto sighed as he sat at the bottom of the tree. Guy had insisted he begin to meditate, and he found it boring. He was way too active a person to sit and hum for hours on end, but he had been told to do what his sensei said, and he did, or pretended to. Naruto's only true concerns at the moment were his taijutsu and his bunshin. He was okay with monkey style and average with Goken, but even Guy acknowledged they weren't fit for him. He couldn't bend enough with monkey style, and he wasn't fit for Goken, and it's hard as rock punches. Guy had sworn to scour every library he could to find an appropriate style, but it was taking too long for Naruto's taste. He huffed as he stood and walked inside to get lunch. Today, Guy was on a mission, and his grandfather was stamping papers and more than likely going stir-crazy. Perhaps he'd visit and break the monotony. Naruto said hello to his mother, who was busy feeding his new little brother, Konohamaru, way too long a name in his opinion, but they'd asked his grandfather to name the kid. Eri smiled as she watched him bug the cook for ramen and got bopped on the head with a wooden spoon. The old woman said he'd be getting a healthy lunch and not that slop he ate at Ikiraku's with his grandfather. Naruto pouted and sat on a stool at the table, his feet swinging off the side. So what are you going to do after lunch, Naruto? He looked at his mom and put a finger to his chin, a habit he had picked up from somewhere. I don't know. I was thinking of going to see Gigi and bug him for some help on the bunshin. I can't get it right no matter how much I try. I know I'm pouring too much chakra into it, but no matter how much I try, I can't get the right amount. It just takes so little. Eri sighed and readjusted Konohamaru to her other arm. Naruto, most ninjas don't use the bunshin once they're out of the academy unless it's to set up a trap. It's a very basic form of genjutsu that is almost worthless to a high-level ninja. It's only taught at the academy to show the students the basics of more advanced techniques. Naruto stared at his mom open-mouthed and gawked. Mom, I thought you weren't a ninja. How do you know all that? Eri rolled her eyes and laughed. Sweetie, I'm married to a ninja and I married into a ninja family. They talk about jutsus like normal families talk about sports. It's impossible not to pick up on some things. Naruto had taken on an introspective look and the gaze in his eyes somewhat worried Eri. So, there are more powerful versions of the bunshin. There are more powerful versions of everything, honey. I'm not helping you though, you should ask your grandfather or Guy-sensei. Naruto nodded and ate his lunch slowly, thinking it over. He remembered reading about what was it, Kage Bunshin. Yes, Kage Bunshin. But adequate information on it had been conveniently deleted from the scroll he had been reading. He was fairly certain it was a powerful technique and he had his reasons for learning it. He'd studied theory with his father every night since he learned to read until he was sick of the word theory. But, he had to admit, learning it was a help. He knew that the more chakra a jutsu took, the less control it demanded. Anyone could use a high-level jutsu if they pumped enough chakra into it. Control was what helped minimize the amount needed to its finest degree. If Bunshin took such a small amount that he couldn't attain it, he would hone his control finer and find either information on the jutsu or find someone who could teach it to him. His grandfather loved it when he learned new things, so he wouldn't be mad for too long, although he'd probably get punished. It'd be worth it if he could just get past the Bunshin jutsu. He said goodbye to his mother and made his way toward the Hokage tower to visit his grandfather, with the warning to be back for dinner. Naruto kept his leaves attached to his head as he walked and he was glad that he had to concentrate on them somewhat. He hated walking through the village. It was the stairs, those god-awful stairs and the whispers. He could hear them sometimes, like they spoke just loud enough so he could hear them. Demon brat, look at him, walking like he owns the place, I wish he'd just disappear forever. Hokage-sama must be under the demon's spell, Yondaime-sama must be rolling over in his grave right now. Shish, he might hear us, he hated them somewhat. They talked bad about him and sometimes said mean things for no reason. They never hit him or beat him, but emotional wounds go deeper than physical wounds. Even though he had friends, even though he had a family, he couldn't make new friends, he couldn't play with any other children. It was like he had the plague. He waved to the guards at the door and they smiled down at him. At least the ninjas looked upon him kindly. At the worst, they were indifferent or cold, but never spiteful. He had several that he liked. Anko was always fun to play with and she had those really cool snakes. Genma was fun to be around and one time Naruto had imitated him by leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets and a senbon in his mouth and the ninja had laughed long and hard before ruffling his hair. Hayate was a kind man, but he was sickly and Naruto shied away from him. The Anbu however, were the weirdest of the bunch. The masks freaked him out sometimes, since he couldn't see their expressions, only the soft voices and slight breathing. Speak of the devil, he grinned and waved at the gray-haired Anbu standing by the Hokage's office door and the man turned to face him with his dog-faced mask. Inu never talked to him much but he was okay, he guessed. Hello Naruto. The Hokage is in a meeting right now, so have a seat. He should be through shortly. Inu was one of those who was indifferent at best. His voice never raised and from what Naruto could tell with his limited dealings with those outside of his small circle, Inu was a very sad man. He seemed to live for his job and not much else. Naruto hopped onto the bench outside the door and swung his feet in time to his heartbeat. Inu sighed behind his mask and prepared himself for the onslaught of questions about to come. Quiet time simply wasn't possible with an inquisitive Naruto around. Hey, Inu-san. Do you know how to do the bunshin? Anu's answer was to form the needed hand seal and a copy of himself appeared. It disappeared just as quickly and Naruto nodded before going back to being silent. 3, 2, 1, hey, Inu-san. Do you know a more powerful version of that jutsu? Inu raised an unseen eyebrow and shuffled his feet. He'd heard from several people the boy was an information sponge, always soaking up what he could. However, he also knew that Sarutobi had forbidden anyone to teach the boy ninjutsu and he wasn't getting in trouble over a curious brat. He wanted to know what the boy was digging at though. It would help pass the time. Why do you want to know? Naruto frowned and kicked his feet back and forth. He didn't think it would be as easy as asking. I can't do a simple bunshin. I just can't control the amount of chakra needed to make one. I've read before that the more power a jutsu takes, the easier it is to make. That's not entirely true. You need control as well. That's why it's necessary to learn the Academy Bunshin, no matter how useless it is. It promotes control. Yeah, but it shouldn't take such a long time to learn. How long is long? 5 months. Inu whistled low and nodded his head before standing bolt upright again. He could hear the people in the office moving around. Well, that's too bad kid, but I can't help you. Your grandfather has forbidden anyone from helping you. You know that. Naruto sighed and put his face in his hands. Yeah, I know. I just thought it couldn't hurt to ask. It never hurts to ask Naruto, but trying to get Inu in trouble. I'm disappointed and ashamed. Naruto grinned at the voice and looked up. But Gigi, it was just a question. He can't possibly teach me anything anyway. All he ever does is stand there. I can hear you, now, Inu, he didn't mean it, did you? I'm sorry. Sarutobi sighed and opened the door more, letting out the man standing behind him. Thank you for coming. I will have an answer for you in the future. That would be most appreciated, Hokage-sama. Naruto watched as the man walked down the hall and was ushered into the office by a slightly annoyed Inu, who shut the door behind him. Naruto sat down in the chair before the desk and looked over the veneer at his grandfather. So, Naruto, what brings you here today? I want to learn something more powerful than the Bunshin. Sarutobi sighed and readied himself for the battle. Naruto, you know what I said. I know. But Gigi, I have a theory. Sarutobi was always happy to listen to a theory, even if he knew he was about to blow holes in it. He bridged his hands and puffed on his ever-present pipe. All right. Convince me. Okay, you know how the less chakra a jutsu uses, the more control you have to have, right? Sarutobi nodded his head. Well, then on the other hand, the more chakra a jutsu takes, the less control it takes to bring the jutsu into existence. You still have to have control, but only to fine-tune the jutsu so it doesn't require so much chakra. I can't seem to get the control low enough for the regular Bunshin, so would you please teach me a different one? Sarutobi sat back in his chair and puffed away on his pipe. He was impressed with his grandson's argument. The boy was 5, but he had been taking his studies seriously. He wanted nothing more than to make his family proud, and that was a boon. He had been ecstatic to learn henge and kawarimi and was fast on his way to mastering them. His solid form henge was a wonder as well. That would require more research. But teaching him a more powerful Bunshin. He was only 5. Could he handle the power? Well, of course he could handle the power, but could he handle the responsibility of that power? Would he flaunt it or would he be prudent with it? Sarutobi sighed, a cloud of smoke billowing from his mouth. What would you do if I taught you a better Bunshin? Naruto was ecstatic. This was as close as he'd probably get, but he had to take that leap. I'd work with it until I mastered it and then I'd ask for another. Sarutobi smiled and clenched the pipe in his teeth. He remembered another child who wouldn't rest until he had mastered a jutsu taught to him. Jiraiya had been a stickler for learning. He didn't just learn a jutsu, he bent it, tweaked it, and perfected it. He didn't rest until he had made it perfect, and then, he asked for more. Perhaps, it would not be a bad idea. 5 months was a long time not being able to use a Bunshin after all. If I do this, you are not to let others know about it except me and Guy. Understood. Naruto nodded vigorously and grinned happily. Sarutobi grinned back and waved his hand. Now go home, scamp. I have work to do. I'll show you the jutsu tonight. Naruto practically flew home. Sarutobi sighed as he walked inside the house. He could see Naruto in the backyard, balancing on one foot on a tree branch, sticking leaves to multiple parts of his body. He hung his hat and robe on the hook by the door and walked out back. Naruto saw his sensei coming and leapt out of the tree, trembling with anticipation. Sarutobi raised his hand, signaling for silence. The Bunshin I will show you is not to be shown to anyone else, I want to say that again. When you get older, I will tell you when it is okay to use it outside of training. Now then, watch what I do. This will help you form the Tsuchi Bunshin. Sarutobi ran through the hand seals slowly, Naruto mocking him, trying to get them right. Once he was comfortable that the boy had it down, he dropped his hands to the sides. As time goes on, you will find that jutsu such as these will become easier to use and eventually you will be able to use only one seal or none at all. You will know how the chakra is molded and it will help make you a better, unpredictable ninja. Now try to mold the chakra correctly. It took 7 tries, but finally Naruto was able to form a Tsuchi Bunshin. He leapt this way and that, cheering loudly, before he was smacked on the head and stood quietly again. That was very good, but now I expect you to train with this until you have it down. I hadn't meant to teach you a jutsu this advanced this early, but it was necessary, I suppose. Practice it more until dinner time. I will come to fetch you. Naruto nodded and flipped through the hand seals again as Sarutobi walked inside. The old Hokage flopped into an armchair and sank back into the aged leather. Here, amongst his sanctuary of old scrolls and books, he felt safe and at peace. No one bothered him here and he was free to research what he pleased. Currently, he was flipping through some scrolls from Whirlpool Country, trying to find anything about Naruto's distant family. The Uzumakis, named because he didn't know any other surname for Naruto's mother's family, were a reclusive and private family, but they left good records and detailed birth certificates. He was looking for anything on the melt, the bloodline he thought the child might have. He read that it only manifested once every 10 generations, and only in the strongest of the children. There weren't many details about it. The Uzumakis didn't want their children used as breeding fodder for a Kekkei Genkai that wasn't guaranteed to manifest or to be in danger constantly of being kidnapped by neighboring villages. What he did find was intriguing and raised more questions. The bloodline was actually a genetic defect that made itself known a few years before puberty in most. One child had been documented as manifesting as early as 4, but Naruto was past that. The infuriating thing was that they made no mention what the damn thing did. Calling it the melt left so many open possibilities. Based on stealth and helped form the ninja world. He found another scroll and quirked an eyebrow. Uzumakis were natural-born assassins and there were several documented episodes of their assassination skills. If Naruto manifested this bloodline, there was no reason not to teach him the ways of the assassin. He would need to learn to be quiet somehow. Sarutobi put the scrolls back and looked at the grandfather clock in the corner of the room. He needed to gather Naruto up and head for the table. Eri would be angry if he kept the boy outside all night. As he walked down the hall, he thought toward the future. Assassination was a skill the boy would have to learn. That meant that he would have to make a kill someday, and the idea pained him that the innocent child would have to take a life. But to truly understand the fragility and precious quality of a life, you must take one, so you can protect those you love. A ninja's trade demanded no less. His eyes widened as he stared out into the yard and saw Naruto running through the seals, 10 copies of himself standing around, loitering. Sarutobi walked up and they all turned and smiled, speaking in a collective voice. Hi Gigi. Naruto, dispel your clones and come inside. Dinner's ready. The blonde let his bunchen sink into the ground and stood up, the exertion clear on his face. But a trace of pride was there also. He had proven that he could do more powerful jutsu and, even though it might be a while before he learned another, he had time to perfect this one. He followed his grandfather inside wordlessly. Sarutobi walked in front, his hands behind his back. He didn't look back as he spoke. I'm proud of you Naruto. And there you have it. A slight time jump and a new jutsu for the boy wonder. Let me know what you think. Thanks for listening. I hope you guys liked it. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like for more what ifs and support the author. See you guys in the next video.